Good morning. Good morning in the room. I always say we're prettier and funnier in person.
She is.
Especially Austin.
Yeah.
And Kelly. And Dwight. The haircut. The haircuts look better in person. Ooh, I know I didn't mean that.
Whoa.
I know, jeez.
Yeah.
Austin, what's going on this week?
A lot. We got a lot going on this week and kind of going into next week. So I'm going to share my screen real quick for those who are online. So let's pull open right there. All right. So let's go into.
I love the Halloween week.
Right. Beautiful. All right, so we're here. We're on Wednesday.
All right.
So.
Good CE class tomorrow on appraisals. Everything you need to know. So you got to register for that. It's brought to us by Lawyer's Title. So that should be a good one. And that's a Q&A session, right? With an appraiser?
I think we were trying to get a Q&A. I don't know if it is.
Oh,
so be pleasantly surprised if it is. But I believe there's going to be a lot. The person who's doing it, I've heard a lot of good stuff about him, Gary. And so yeah, jump on in. The registration link is there, so you can just go directly here. We also have it on Facebook group.
Yeah, and if you haven't taken a class on appraisals before, I encourage you to go. You need to know the details on how it's all done. So if you ever come up with a short appraisal, you can kind of look at how they're making adjustments so you can kind of find the weakness in what they've done. Super good. How we go?
good stuff.
Well, on the other side of that is from the calls I'm on, the east half of the United States is starting to really have appraisal issues. And so it seemed like it started when the Fed said they were going to stop tapering or slow down tapering in November. And so if you think about it, having gone through this a few times, if they think rates are going to go up, then the appraisers are not going to give us our values because they realize that the market will level off. And so we're heading into that time where we will start to have more appraisals because we already know how hard it's been to find comps for these prices. You can't. So keep that in mind. That may be our number one problem next year.
Okay. Yeah. So that should be a good CE class. And then every Wednesday we have our open IT office hours with Tyler, our amazing IT guy. And then Austin has his command open hours during that time also. So if you have any command questions or computer questions for Tyler, 1:30 to 3:30 every Wednesday. And on Thursday, Dwight has his wealth building class. It is part 3 of the series. It's a monthly series. Dwight, you want to talk about part 3?
I would just say part 3 is a lot more exciting than 1 or 2 because I can really get into more of the details about how the wealth actually builds with mortgage reductions and principal and whatnot. So if you haven't been to 1 or 2, come to 3 because I take the first 15 minutes to do a catch up. And then 3 and 4, I think, are really a lot more exciting than 1 and 2.
Are you saying the excitement compounds?
I'm saying that the topics get better. What do you think? I know somebody at this table here that's been through all of them. So what do you think, Austin? 3 and 4 are better.
Oh yeah, no, I like these because like the first ones are really good if you're running, wanting to learn the basics of investment, but like going into the 3 and 4, Dwight does really good at just explaining things that are a little more complex on a very personal level and just how you can use it and apply it into your own wealth building as opposed to feeling like you're taking a 400 level course at college. So it's like it's really good. I enjoy it.
And those,
You get free donuts.
Hey, all right, sweet.
yeah. Okay. Donuts. And this is not about your business. It's just about your personal wealth and using real estate and the tax advantages to build your personal wealth. And it's something that we believe passionately about and Dwight believes passionately about and is knowledgeable about. So it's great to share that. Heather just stepped out of the room, but we have our goodbye Heather happy hour on Tuesday. So if you did not read my email, I saw there are some people who haven't read it yet. Heather is following her heart, and we're talking about you, Heather. She's following her heart and going to work for a nonprofit. And so we're happy, sad about it. We're happy for her, but we're sad and we're going to miss her. So we're going to celebrate her and send her off on Tuesday. It's her last day from 3 to 5 in the training room right here. Hope to see you all here. Food and drinks will be served. Toast to Heather. Bring your favorite memory to share.
Kleenex.
Bring tissues, right? I don't know. And then also, next week, just as long as we're kind of getting ahead on that, is a luxury mastermind on Thursday, the 4th, and that is by invite only. But if you are interested in luxury and are not part of that group yet, talk to Jenny Hill or Linda Heinrichs, and you can get involved in our luxury group. It's a really great mastermind on how to be competitive in the luxury market, what resources are available. It's a really good conversation.
It's a really good conversation.
Cool. All right. So new discounts that have just been negotiated by Dwight. Globe lighting. We now have a discount on light fixtures, everything in their showroom and that they have available. And we are going to do a showroom tour similar to what we did at Contract Furnishings Mart. And that is going to be not next team meeting on the 2nd, but the following week on the 9th. So instead of coming here or being on Zoom, we will go down the street to Globe Lighting and get a tour of their facility and find out more about our exclusive discounts.
It'll be an illuminating experience.
Globe
And
Lighting is right down the street from Dick's Sporting Goods, so
Oh, it's not
Yeah.
a mile from here.
I know, I just got
After that one?
oh, that was so
great
good,
fun.
right? That was like
yeah.
that was like a showstopper right there.
Yeah.
And again, these discounts will be not for you guys, our agents, and their clients, family, friends. Do you want to add anything else about the discounts?
No, I would just say, you know, we wanted to get what we think are the two most common things that homeowners and buyers will do to their houses, and we wanted to get them at competitive prices. So, you know, between Contract Furnishing Smart and everything they sell, which includes cabinets now, so you can do pretty much your whole house. And now Globe Lighting, they have everything for lighting, unbelievable. I got a quick tour of some of the new technology that's coming out for lighting. It's pretty amazing, a lot of Bluetooth lighting, a lot of things you can do on your phone when you're not home. And so we'll get a little introduction to that. This facility is not anywhere near as big as Contractors Furnishing Smart, but it is loaded with, you know, visual stimulation. So again, this will be for you and your client. So whenever you hear of someone that's going to do remodeling, you can get an appointment with the salesperson at Globe Lighting or Contractors Furnishing Smart, and they'll help them all the way through, and we'll get the same price as the builders are getting. And we are the first real estate company in all of Globe Lighting, which is in 3 states, to be able to do this.
Pioneers.
Good stuff. Pioneers. Yes. Love it.
Nice work, Dwight.
Thank
You. That also fits with what we're going to be talking about in the luxury group next week, which is concierge services in your luxury business. And really, it's in all your business. So perfect timing. Thank you.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. This is one of the things you can include in your, you know, lifetime, your approach to having lifetime relationships with each client that you sell a home for or to. These are the kinds of things that keep them in touch with you. And the thing about lighting is the technology is actually pretty amazing. And so I did ask if they would create a little video monthly to share some of the new functionality that they have coming to us. And then we can share that with our clients, right? So it gives us another way to reach out to our clients, say, hey, this functionality now exists at Globe Lighting. Call me for builder rates. We'll set up an appointment however you want to do it. It really is amazing. So I'm
Yeah.
excited about it.
So cool. Lights with no plugs, lamps with no plugs.
Right.
You're like the Thomas Edison of real estate.
No, they are way out ahead of everyone in Portland. And they now have an office in Dallas, which they said they're building the coolest showroom in the country for $5 million. And so even if you have clients leaving, this was one of the cool things about these relationships. They're in Seattle, Portland, Bend. They just opened up in Dallas. Their next on the list is Phoenix. So these are the areas that our clients are coming from and moving to. And again, it's all about having reasons to add value to your client relationships. So I'm hoping to provide monthly videos with CFM where they'll demo some new product that they have, and with these guys that we can send out to our clients.
Good stuff. All right, Austin, we have a new way of reserving conference rooms, which is an exciting thing because that means the more and more people are coming back to the office. So we've had lots of people booking conference rooms, and it was one of the few things that we were using the old intranet site on MyKW for. So Austin's kind of helped us revamp it. You want to show it off?
Yeah, so this method that we've set up is a lot more accessible for those who are familiar with the MyKW system. And the way it works is just through our KWPP agents website. And so what you can do is when you're on the home screen, all you do is go to the resources tab, and it's going to be the third one here, reserve a conference room. And you'll just click on it and you can select which room you want, including the ones at the Lake Oswego office. We have the vault and the small room there. And the training room, we do have that as a reservation. And so all you need to do is click on the specific room that you want. So let's say room 4 here in the office. And then it's going to just pull up a form that you fill out, how long you want the meeting for. And then so you select a time, or select how long you want it for, and then you select the time. Any times that don't show up means that it is taken, and it will accommodate how long your duration is. So if you select a 2-hour time, it's going to block out time before this. So like if you wanted a 1 o'clock hour for your appointment, but it's not available at 2 and you want a 2-hour time, it's not going to give you that 1 o'clock hour, because it's saying, okay, we're going to find the best place to give you uninterrupted 2 hours. And so just look at the time you'd like, you select that time, and then you fill out this form. It'll provide you with an email confirmation with a reminder ahead of time. As well, we'll be able to see it on our end so we can confirm who has the room. The idea of this is to make it a lot easier for you, give you reminders, but also I didn't bring it with me as a visual aid, but we do have QR codes for each room. And so if you happen to be stopping by with an impromptu visit and you're like, oh, I forgot to reserve the conference room, you can use your phone, scan the QR code right next to the room and go straight to the specific form for that room. So it just makes it a little quicker so you don't feel like you have to jumble around, just ask Brian, and then it takes 5 minutes to load that old form. That's all gone. So now you can just do it on your own. It's mobile friendly as well. So yeah, just come on in and try it out.
Love it. Thank you so much. So let us know if you have any questions or feedback, but we're just trying to streamline as many things as possible and have everything in the KWPP agents site. So if there's anything that you need that is not there, ask Austin for it.
Yes.
Thank you, Austin. All right, so now we have a special guest today. Kelly recently has been getting a lot of questions. We've had some different things come up regarding HOAs and some condo HOAs. And so we wanted to invite a special guest, Carson Porton from CID Analytics, and they review HOA documents. So we wanted to have him come on and speak a little bit, and then just kind of dig in on what to look for in HOA docs. What are some things that our agents have had experiences with recently of snafus, things like that. So hi, Carson. Thank you for joining us.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I don't know where we start. I've done a lot of work with agents throughout the Keller Williams network. We get quite a bit of referral activity from several of your offices around town already. I've been in your office there in Bridgeport for a presentation at least once, maybe even a couple of times. But just sort of jumping in, what we do, CID Analytics is a homeowner association due diligence service. Essentially, we produce a report we call the CEDAR report. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I was gonna have Austin turn it up a little bit.
At any rate, we do an assessment, what we call an examination of the homeowners association historical records and financial reports that are designed to provide the buyer with a what I would call something similar to or related to the process of an inspection of the home. What we're really doing is examining or inspecting the homeowners association's financial and governance model. We produced a report in the form of a PDF document at the moment. We are working right now with our web developers to create an interactive version of it where the buyer would be able to access the entire report in a real-time screen on their device, whether it's a PC or a laptop or whatever it may be, or a tablet or a smartphone. And they would have access the same exact information, would just be a little bit more robust in terms of how they could use the data. The process itself is anywhere from 3 to 5 day examination between going through the documents and producing the report, delivering the report, and hopefully if the buyer has any questions and they wants to have a conference with us or a conversation by phone or email, then we follow up and try and answer any kind of questions that they may have been raised by our analysis. What I can tell you after almost 10 years of doing this and another almost 20 years doing reserve studies and budget work for homeowners associations throughout the United States, primarily the due diligence work that we've done over the last 10 years has been focused on the Oregon market, although we do these reports all over the United States. But for about 10 years before we started CID Analytics, we were doing reserve studies and traveled all over the United States and had a lot of experience with homeowners associations at a different settings, either older communities, much larger, et cetera. Also a lot of homeowners associations in other parts of the country that don't really fit the model of the what you see a lot of in Oregon. Oregon doesn't really have a lot of really large homeowners associations, traditional, subdivisions with thousands and thousands of homes in a planned community setting. There are a few of those in the area, but not many. But we've seen a lot of this. We've seen all the various permutations of what can happen. The Portland market right now, as I probably don't need to tell anybody who's an active real estate agent in this market, it's concentrated and focused almost exclusively at the moment in the condominium market. Most of the major developments in the last 15 to 25 years in the Portland area have been some sort of an attached home situation. Quite a few of them have been either mid-rise and high-rise condominiums. Some of those buildings and some of those developments now are pushing 20 to 25 years of age. And a lot of them are coming to the point where they're starting to have to address the issues of long-term replacement, renovation of legacy systems, i.e. systems that were installed when the building was originally built. And this is really just, quite frankly, this is where the rubber meets the road. If you're a condominium association and it's 20 years and you're 20 years down the road in the life cycle of the community, you're starting to be confronted with challenges and issues and management and government issues that you have to address that you have not had to deal with in the past. All I can really say at this point, after having examined almost 1,500 homeowners associations throughout the United States, is that there's nothing like this that a buyer can get that is any more important than this type of analysis. There's just so much to know. Our tagline in our marketing program is you're buying more than a home. And it's really true. You're not really just buying a home when you buy a home in a homeowners association. What you're actually doing is you are investing in a nonprofit corporation. Because most homeowners associations throughout the country, and particularly in Oregon, they're a nonprofit corporation. And when you buy a home in a nonprofit corporation that is, i.e. a homeowners association, you become responsible for some portion of that organization's debts, ongoing operating expenses, and potentially deferred liability in the form of deferred maintenance or long-term reserve spending. Cannot emphasize the importance of it. If you talk to any of the agents or buyers that we've worked with, either through Keller Williams or other brokerages around the area, I think you'll probably get a pretty good sense of what's going on, and you'll find there's a really high degree of acceptance in the market. It's been quite well received throughout not only in Portland, but also in the Seattle market and up and down the West Coast and California in particular. So we do have a 1 hour presentation that we do under the sponsorship of title companies. And if anybody would like to sign on for that, I'm sure you can get your title rep to sponsor a presentation, and it's worth for a 1 hour continuing education credit, and we'll go through the whole thing. I can't even sort of give you the long and the short about what we really do, why we feel that these various core concepts that we're looking at when we do one of these examinations, what they really involve and why they're important, not only to a buyer, but to the homeowners association itself in terms of their long-term, not only financial sustainability, but just the sustainability and the livability of the community. So anybody has any questions specifically, I probably can answer it if it has anything to do with the homeowners association. So just jump right in, or let me know if the next step would be. It's probably too long to go through the PowerPoint that we do for the class because it is designed to be a 1-hour presentation, but I can certainly answer any kind of questions anybody may have.
That's awesome. Thank you, Carson. Whenever I represent a client buying a townhome or a condo, I think the review of those documents, the HOA documents, are more important probably than even the home inspection report as to making a good investment on the building. So thank you for that perspective. I really appreciate it. Hey, Connie, are you available?
I'm here.
Yeah, Connie, I was thinking about a transaction you had last year that was really interesting. And this kind of goes to talk about how important these HOA documents are and some of the perils that you can trip yourself into when doing a transaction. You did such a great job on that transaction with that condo that had the pending assessment. Could you tell that story a little bit?
Yeah, so I had a client last year in November. She was originally going to buy a single family detached property, and then somehow her friends convinced her to get a condo. So we went condo searching. Her biggest thing was safety for herself, not necessarily location. It's just community. She wanted to find community because she's single and alone. So that's all she kept repeating was safety, safety, safety. And when we found a condo, we looked at it that night and we happened to run into one of the neighbors, and I'm such a big mouth. I love talking to anybody. And so I stopped the neighbor who was taking out their trash, and I just asked him some questions about how long he's lived in the building and how he liked it, what he thought it was like in terms of community, because she was moving in by herself. And he went on about how much he loved it. He lived there with his daughter. So she really felt good enough to write an offer on that particular condo. I did ask at that time if there were any issues that he knew of in terms of repairs or sewer lines or whatnot. And he said that there were some repairs done to the condo building. And it's only 6 units, that particular building. But he said that the woman above the condo that was being sold is actually like she spearheads the group. She's the HOA leader, which later we learned was the director of the HOA board. And so we made an offer, we got it, go into inspections, we get the disclosures. In the disclosures, the seller did say that there was a special assessment that was going to happen on the siding. And there was a forensic report available. They didn't attach it, so we asked for the attachment. We got it, and my client and I reviewed everything during inspections as well, and we asked the inspector if he could take a look at the siding. Then I decided to take her upstairs to see if we can catch the woman who spearheads all of this, and she happened to be home. So I had my client, ask all questions that she wanted to. And the lady above was open and honest about everything. She said that they have been talking this entire year. So at that time it was 2020. Remotely, during their minutes, they have said that they needed to repair the siding, that they're thinking based on estimates, the siding was going to cost around $10,000, but it would be shared by all 6 owners of the building. So $10,000 my client felt was doable because it would only affect her HOA. The HOA would go up a little bit. She didn't know how much. I didn't know how much. The HOA director didn't know how much, but she figured $10,000 wasn't as bad as what she ended up finding out. So we provided all of the HOA docs, the link, my transaction coordinator helped me in that. And we closed. Oh, so they also said the special assessment will be revisited in the new year. So our closing date was January 3rd. In the new year, they didn't even have a date. So I told my client multiple times in writing, you can pull out anytime up to this point. And she said she was so in love with it, she didn't want to. So I had all of that in writing, by the way. So any of you, just make sure you have everything in writing. We closed on January 3rd. A week later, they had an HOA meeting and the assessment came out to $130,000. So
I'm not laughing, but I'm not trying to make light of it, but yeah, go ahead.
I'm like, it's funny and bad at the same time. So, funny enough though, in 1 month after her closing, I did follow up with her. I texted her and I said, hey, if you need anything or how's it going? What do you need? I'm here to help you. And she said, there's been some hiccups with HOA, but I love the community. I love everything about it. I'm willing to work through it. I did find out the new assessment amount. It was for this much. And I love it so much here that I'm willing to work it out. And we're going to try and figure it out here in the community. And I was like, great. 2 months after that, I get this call or email and she is investigating. She's investigating my work. She's investigating my transaction coordinator's work. And basically she was looking to blame somebody for her purchase. And clearly it wasn't us. She had nothing on us, but she really wanted to go after the seller, to be honest. She wanted to go after the seller for non-disclosure of something, but we got everything. And I even took her to the neighbors 2 times.
Mhm.
So, and I didn't know, if you look at the condo contract, it says in there, if an agent, like the agent should also help with the due diligence in terms of, go to the neighbor or ask questions in the community. I had no idea that even wasn't written in there, but I had done all of that, thank goodness. And I had everything in writing too. So I had to respond. I responded to her a couple of times via email, very professionally. I mean, I felt really bad for her, really. And we're fine. I haven't heard from her since, but that goes to show that someone can come after you or try to, based on what they feel was negligence. But in this case, she just had no case. She got all the documents she needed, and she knew that there was a question mark in terms of how much that special assessment was going to cost. I did actually work on another condo, and we did use you, CID Analytics, this past week. So thank you for that. We got it within 4 or 5 days, the report back. And it's helpful because HOA docs, there could be 50 pages, there could be 500. And that's just too much. I'm not an expert, and I kind of want to dodge and bridge and let someone else do it. And for $500, it is so worth it to just send that over to somebody, an attorney who can review that for you, for your client.
Well, what I would say just parenthetically is that this story pretty much embodies almost all of the issues that we deal with when we're doing one of these due diligence examinations. It kind of covers the whole gamut of why it's a good idea to do this, what a buyer is getting themselves involved in, what the limitations are with respect to any kind of disclosure that the buyer may ask for from the HOA or even from the seller. And also, most importantly of all, the limit and the constraints that are placed on the real estate agent that's in the middle of this, simply because the agent doesn't know all the answers to these questions and can't even be expected to know. In some instances, you may not even be entitled to have this information, depending on which side of the transaction you're involved in. But at the end of the day, what's really important is to understand that, as you point out, there's a lot of information here to digest. It could be 500 pages of documentation. And even a seasoned real estate buyer or an agent may or may not even know if all that documentation that you've been provided is either accurate or complete or if it's all the information that you could really want to have in order to make a fully informed decision about this investment. It's a lot more complicated process than most people think. It's not helped in the state of Oregon by the lack of statutory requirements that are imposed on real estate transactions. Oregon, for example, does not require a statutory requirement for disclosure on the part of the homeowners association itself. All disclosures that must be completed during the course of a transaction are imposed on the seller. So the homeowners association itself, the board, the management company, none of these people, there's no legal requirement under the statute that they have to do anything, unlike California, for example, or Hawaii. Those are the two best examples of statutes that would be more beneficial in the state of Oregon and even Washington. So, it's basically, it's a caveat emptor situation where a buyer must be aware. And if you're not aware of what you need to be aware of, then this is where you end up. So it's a dicey, it can be a dicey thing, not always, but it can be. One of the most important things to take away from this conversation, I think, right now, is that we are at a transitional point with most of the condominium communities in the Portland area and frankly anywhere in the state of Oregon. Most of these communities have been built within the last 25 years. If they're not really old, and if they're really old, then they've got a whole nother set of issues to be you got to address. But the condominiums that were built between the early 1990s and the crash of the subprime market in 2008, that's a period of about 20 to 25 years. Most of these communities, I would say that on average, if you had to pick a number, I would say that most of the communities in the Portland market, the Tri-City County market right now, probably on average about 20 years of age. 20 years of age is the tipping point. This is the point where these communities are starting to have to face the issue of major expenditures, whether those are what you might call traditional reserve expenditures, i.e. expenses that the association should have been saving up money in the form of reserve contributions every year for the last 30 years, so that at year 20, they've already got the money that they need to pay for some sort of major expense like a roof or replacement of the HVAC system in an entire building or something of that nature. Or it could just be an expense that they never even captured in a long-term reserve analysis, like a reserve study. They may not have had any idea that all of a sudden at year 20, there was going to be some, or 25 years down the road after the building was built, that there's going to be some major expenditure that was going to pop up and go, geez, we need a lot of money. And so it can be either way. It can be just a complete out of the blue surprise, or it can be something that perhaps they tried to plan ahead and sort of predict what the costs were going to be. Either way, from a buyer's perspective, if you're buying into one of these, sort of second generation or third generation periods where you're maybe not the first owner, but you're the second or third, the big question becomes how much equity is left when this seller moves on, and how much equity am I really inheriting when I buy into this association? I get a piece of this reserve fund. Hopefully that fund's going to have enough money to pay for that $250,000 roof replacement or some of these other major expenses that are only going to happen every 10 or 15, 20 years. You just never know. A lot of homeowners associations in the United States don't even have a reserve study. They've never even done one. Even that's even true in Oregon, even though in the state of Oregon, there's been a statutory requirement to conduct a reserve study since October of 1999. So now we're 22 years into this thing, or 21 years into this whole experiment of saying you have to have a long-term reserve fund, reserve spending analysis. And there's still a lot of homeowners associations that have either never done a reserve study, or they've done one once or twice and they don't update it on a regular basis, or they can't find it and the buyer asks for it and they don't even know where it is. So, I mean, I just emphasize again, it can be a tricky water to navigate. And from an agent's perspective, you just don't want to be in the middle of that. You don't want to be the one that's responsible for trying to.
Carson,
Can I add one thing
Go
real
ahead.
quick? I just want to let other agents know that when you are writing your contract, though, it's standard that it defaults to 5 business days for HOA review. but make sure you just put in your own number and do like 10 days, 10 business days, because once you gather all those documents and send it to CID Analytics, it's gonna take them 5 days, not business days, but 5 days to review that. So you want to make sure you're building in enough time to get that done if you're encouraging your client to do so. And again, I implore you to just have them do it.
Yeah, well, that's extremely important. It's also extremely important to make sure that the seller and the other side of the transaction understand that review period begins once those documents have been provided. Because in many instances, and this is what we call the Easter egg hunt, getting the documents can be the biggest challenge of all, especially in some situations where you've got a large community or an older community and maybe a transitional community that's just changed management companies. And so you get a lot of these excuses about, well, we just changed management companies, we don't have some of this information. So from a buyer's perspective, you're looking at this from a perspective of, I've asked for this information to be provided to me by the seller, who is the individual in this transaction who has legal authority to expect to get those documents from the homeowners association. And then once that seller agrees to provide that information as a condition of my offer, then it's up to the seller to provide that information. Once this buyer is satisfied that they've gotten the information they were asking for, then their review period begins, because you can't really review the documents till you have the documents.
Yeah, Carson, on that note, one of the things I've always found challenging when reviewing the HOA documents is they all look so different. Like, you don't really know what document you have in your hand. In other states, they're kind of mandated that they're on a specific form, correct?
Correct. What's new in the state of Oregon is this.
Yeah.
This is the list of documents that state of California requires that you provide as a seller of a home and a homeowners association. And so by virtue of having made an offer, it triggers the requirement. And most of these documents are listed according to the way they're described in the statute. Mm-hmm. So, you're not, we run this all the time. We get 100 documents in a particular order, and you've got to open every single PDF just to even see if the document in that PDF is consistent with what the title of we see things, all things like documents that say financials. Well, what exactly does that mean? It can be a series of bank statements, monthly statements that may go back 5 years, may not have any information about the financials from the perspective of how we look at it. It's just all over the map.
I wouldn't be surprised to see meeting minutes like on a napkin.
Yeah. If you get them at all.
Right. Is there a requirement to update the reserve studies by the state of Oregon, or can they just do it once, or how often do they have to update those?
State law requires the reserve study to be updated every year.
Every year.
And most specifically, what the state law actually states is that there are specific pieces of information that must be included in the reserve study document. Most important of these would be the beginning reserve fund balance as of the first day of the current budget year. So in this case, right now, in October of 2021, if you are an association that operates on a calendar year basis for purposes of budgeting, then a current reserve study would be a reserve study. The number one, it says specifically not what the balance might have been on January 1st, because they updated the study 5 years ago and it projected that what the balance might have been on January 1st, 2021. We're talking about a study that says the balance on January 1st, 2021 was X. That's the reserve fund balance as of the beginning of this year. Second piece of information is you're looking for a 30-year projection of the reserve fund expenditures beginning with the current budget year. So if your reserve study was conducted 5 years ago and it was a 30-year projection, now that document that they provide you with, it's only got 25 years of future reserve spending projections in it, beginning with the current year. So because 5 years has already elapsed. That document, if it doesn't have those two things, a current year budget beginning balance for the reserve fund and a 30-year projection of reserve expenditures beginning with the first year, i.e. the beginning of the first day of the current budget year. If you don't have those two simple pieces of information codified in your reserve study, then you do not have a reserve study that complies with state law. That would be just two reasons right there where you have to update the reserve study and you'll get a lot of argument from I've sat in board meetings where an attorney actually advised their board client that they did not have to update their reserve study every year. So there. Now, that being said, because we knew this would eventually become an issue, what we're doing with CID Analytics, we engaged and retained our corporate counsel, which is Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe, one of the largest law firms on the planet. And we had asked them to do a comprehensive analysis of the specific laws. We created what we call the Legal Workbook. And it's got 53 questions that we asked for them to confirm and provide us with a legal opinion regarding these 53 points of law that apply to homeowners associations. And we pay them to do this research, and it costs us about $1,500 to $2,000 for any state that they do the analysis for. At this point, we have had them research the laws in 8 states, which is primarily where we are marketing the service right now. And we actually have, in our opinion, a definitive opinion from Orrick International stating that in their opinion, reserve studies under state law in Oregon must be updated every year. As far as I'm concerned, that's the final word on this conversation. And if anybody tries to tell you they're not required to have a reserve study done, et cetera, I would ask them for a legal opinion. Because in my opinion, you have to do a reserve study. More importantly, it's just poor governance if you are required to do a reserve study by any statute, by any measure, either by statutory requirement or but just good common sense, you've done a reserve study. It makes no sense to not update it every year. It's a highly dynamic analysis. And if you don't update it every year, it simply doesn't benefit you. You know, it's like not reconciling your checkbook periodically when you get your bank statement. You know, you don't know how much money you've got in the bank. Well, same thing with your reserve study. If you don't update it every year, the future projections and the analysis that is trying to project these costs and these forward liabilities is simply not going to be accurate. So it's very important. And from a buyer's perspective, I would say it's one of the two top important pieces of information that you're going to get from any homeowners association is a current reserve study. The other one would be if the association is large enough to require an audit or a review of the financial statement, which is a formal document provided by a CPA. Then if they do meet the requirements for that statutory requirement in Oregon to have that review or audit done, then that's also an extremely important document for a buyer. Mm-hmm. So those two things right alone, if you can just get those in an operating budget, you're ahead of the curve. Mm-hmm. You might get those meeting minutes on the cocktail napkins, but you know those 3 documents originally and initially, the reserve study, a review or audit, and the approved operating budget. It's important. Approved means that the board has actually ratified and agreed that this is the amount of money we're going to spend during the current cycle. Financial cycle. If it's not approved, there's no guarantees. Kind of like that conversation about how much the assessment might be with your buyer there in the 6-unit example. Until the assessment has been actually ratified by board resolution, there's no guarantee that the assessment won't be 10 times. We can talk about $5,000 or $10,000 until you actually ratify the resolution that authorizes the special assessment. You don't know how much it's going to be. It's the same thing with your budget. You know, a draft budget or a proposed budget or a conversation about the budget or anything else doesn't matter until it's approved. And the board has, what the board is doing when they approve the budget is they're committing to spending this money in this manner. So they can't go back after the fact and say, well, geez, you know, we thought it was going to be $100,000 in expenses for the year, but now we're going to need $150,000. So get out your checkbook and just write us another check. You can't do that with the homeowners association. You have to approve the budget in order to be able to rightfully and legally demand that the owners pay these assessments every month. So that's important to a buyer as well. But the reserve study absolute must be updated every year to answer your question.
Yeah, one more question about the reserve study, and this is maybe if you can look into your crystal ball a little bit, but with the escalation in labor costs and cost of goods, do you expect there to be increases in HOA dues coming up as they update their reserve studies?
Generally speaking, I would say yes.
Yeah.
The whole issue, my reserve studies, I still sort of begrudgingly, I have to do a certain number of reserve studies at the moment, only because, we were in the business for almost 15 years before we started CID Analytics, and I still have a few clients, and I can't really I just can't quite pull myself away from all of them. So I still do a few reserve studies every year, usually about 5 or 6. They're usually large projects. But I have a whole section, two paragraphs in my disclaimer now that I've had to add to my reserve studies since about 2018 is when I started doing this, because of the extreme inflation in construction costs. And I would argue that probably the typical homeowners association in the Portland or Seattle market right now, who does have a reserve study and is updating the reserve study on a regular basis. If they've got a reserve study provider that really has their finger on the pulse and understands what's going on in the marketplace, I would expect those annual reserve fund contributions, which are just embedded, they're sort of incorporated into the operating budget, which becomes the basis for these monthly assessments that you pay, your monthly HOA fees. So if that reserve fund contribution is embedded in your operating budget, so it's a line item in your operating budget, and you have a realistic assessment going on where you have a realistic idea about what those reserve fund contributions should be, then you're probably going to be seeing that portion of your HOA fee, that i.e. the reserve fund contribution, is probably going to be increasing at a rate on average is probably at least 4 or 5% a year for the next several years, and probably even more so now that we're looking at inflation rate in the United States at pushing 5%. And nobody knows how long that's going to continue. But right now, for the last 6 months or so, the inflation rate in the US has been hovering around 4.5% to 5%, significantly more than it had been for the previous 15 years or so before the pandemic. So we're now going to be faced with an annual inflation rate in the United States of probably around 5%. I would expect your reserve fund contributions to have to continue to step up at that level, if not more. And that's going to be reflected in increases in your monthly HOA fees, no doubt about it. And that says nothing about the other expenses that are captured in your operating expense estimate every year that becomes the basis of your budget. If you live in Portland in particular, you probably are well aware that water and sewer rates are going through the roof like nobody's business. So, if you have to incorporate your water and sewer rates in Portland into your budget, and then on top of that, now you've got a major reserve fund contribution, and that's going to be ramping up at a rate of 4 or 5% a year for the next 4 or 5 years. Yeah, you can expect your monthly HOA fees to increase. There's no doubt about it.
Wow.
2 other major expenses that anybody who's buying into a condominium that is of any significant size. And by that, I mean, just look at the budget. If they've got a large 6-figure or a 7-figure budget, they're $1 million a year or more in annual revenue, that's a large condominium in the Portland market.
Wow.
A 6-unit would not qualify. You're not going to have the kind of insurance costs that you would be associated with. But if you've got a large condominium and the association has a robust insurance program in place, that insurance premium is large. It's easily a 6-figure number, and it's probably going to increase at a rate above the current inflation rate. We're seeing insurance rates just go through the roof right now. Particularly if you're anywhere on the west side, where you're potentially in one of the more risky seismic zones, or any property that's along the river, the flooding and the earthquake costs, insurance costs are increasing dramatically. And I would expect that to continue in places like Florida, where we do a number of types of consulting for different types of homeowners associations. Insurance costs in Florida are just out of bounds. I mean, to the point where some people can barely afford to own a house because insurance costs are so high. But you're going to start seeing higher and higher insurance
Wow.
premiums in the Portland market.
That's great stuff. I want to give the rest of the group the opportunity to ask me questions.
Can I go to the chat for a
Yeah.
sec? Thank you, Kirsten. This is great stuff. Okay, a couple questions. Is there a law that regulates how much a management company can charge to provide the information to the agents or the title companies?
Unfortunately, in the state of Oregon, the answer to that is no. The statute, what it doesn't say is as some sort of what I would call mealy mouth kind of language. It says the association can charge a reasonable amount for production and copying of the documentation. The term reasonable amount is not defined by the statute. Again, unlike California or even Arizona or Hawaii, which have specific limits on what you can charge for these documents. So that's another failing of the statute. But no, they can charge whatever you want. As anybody's had to deal with condo search or possibly HomeWise to get these documents, you may know that this document bundle that we recommend a buyer ask for, if you get all of them and you have to buy them all from condo search, you're probably going to spend almost as much money as to get all those documents from condo search than you would pay for our report. It can easily be $200 to $300 for all these documents. So, but yeah, you can charge whatever you want. Most of the time, if you are paying for the documents, there are management companies that will charge you for them. Usually the fee structures that I've seen from the Portland area management companies, at least the larger ones, the only good news really there is it's less than what condo search would charge, but that's about it. Whereas it's not as bad as you could be in some places. Some areas though, like California and Arizona, management in Florida, even where Florida is just like the poster child for all the possible world's worst problems you can have with homeowners associations. But yeah, there are management companies that charge quite a lot for them, but in Portland market, most of them it's reasonable, $100, $150 maybe, but they can charge whatever they want from by statute. It's strictly a negotiated point between the seller and buyer. So that's all it is.
Right. And then Linda said that she loves and appreciates CID. And then we do have the question, you kind of touched on it about time frame and cost. I believe you said 3 to 5 days is your guys' turnaround.
Our absolute turnaround is 5 days from the point when we have the documents. Okay. And we will, in our order process, we make the buyer aware that they kind of have to hit the go button and say to us, this is the documentation we've got, move forward. And because at that point we work pretty quickly. I've got 2 people that work with me. We also do use optical scanning and recognition software to go through all these documents so we can sort through all the riffraff and get, cut to the chase on it. So if we start on one of these reports today, this morning after I get off this meeting, by tomorrow afternoon, we're getting close to done if we're not done with it. And so if all of a sudden after the fact somebody comes back and says, oh hey, here's a whole bunch more documentation, we're back to the beginning at that point. At that point we do charge what we call resubmission fee, and you have to pay another $145 to basically reset the bar and have us redo the whole thing, because it's not like 3 days down the road we're going to be sitting around waiting for more documents and we're going to get going. So we have to get all the documentation in one place. First thing we do is go through all of it and figure out what we've got and how much information we really have to digest, and we organize it. And then if we halfway through the process somebody says, oh, we've got a whole much new information here, it kind of throws the whole train off the track. So but it's 5 days absolute. In some instances, a lot of these associations in the Portland market, we've already examined them in the past. That does not help us a lot in some instances because this information is pretty dynamic and it changes pretty quickly. But we also have what we call, we produce this report, by the way, with a software product that we've developed over the last 3 or 4 years. And the way that process works is we have what we call a data kernel for every homeowners association that we've ever examined. So we have a certain amount of data. This didn't have to do with finances or their reserve study and that sort of thing, all this dynamic information. We just have this sort of core informational understanding about that association. So when we get an order for, ABC condominium down in the Pearl, we just take that initial kernel and we can say, boom, we've already got the report itself is kind of formatted and created. And then what we're doing when we get done with this, we go through all this data, we parse through it, and we start plugging in the information that's relative to our analysis at that point. And then we fill out it's sort of fill in the blanks sort of thing. And it's a template. And so about over 300 individual queries have to be responded to before we can complete this thing and publish this report. And the way the software is engineered, every single one of those three, I think I counted it the other day, it's 319 individual queries. Some of those appear in the actual report itself. Some of them are just background information that we use to drive our scoring process. But all 319 of those queries must be responded to before we can publish the report. So we can't have a query that requires a response and just say, we're in a hurry, let's go ahead and just do this, publish this report. It doesn't work that way. Every single one of these queries must be addressed in order for us to be able to get to the point where the software will even regurgitate the report and send it out. So that's how the process goes. And this process of running through the report, responding to all these queries, and then distilling it into the report is what we're doing when we parse through and we go through all this documentation. So 5 days is absolute max. If we have done the association and examined them in the past, it might be 4 days and sometimes maybe even 3 that we can turn it around, but it just depends. Right now, associations that are, if we examine the association that's in October right now, if we examine an association in June, pretty uncommon, we'll do it twice a year and a couple sales. But if we examine that association for the most previous occurrence was in June of this year, there's probably very little information that's embedded in that previous report that hasn't already changed. And so what our job as conducting this due diligence is to make sure that the most recent information that a buyer has been able to obtain from the association is actually the information that's reflected in our report. And we get that question all the time. People say, well, you already you did a report 3 months ago. Can you just sell me that report? My answer is no, because number one, I still got to go through that report and make sure that every piece of information, all 300 plus of those queries, that they're all accurate at this point in time. So, but it's 5 days max, and the cost is $495 if you don't have a resubmit. And I would definitely encourage everybody, get all the documents first and try and avoid the resubmit. We don't do the resubmit and the additional $145 or $149 in order to generate more money for the report. What we're really doing it for is to just make absolute sure to call to attention to the buyer that they need to get this information to us right out of the gate, so we don't have to start and stop and start and stop. I prefer not to have to go back and resubmit or revise a report if I can avoid having to do so. And I'm not really that concerned about the $149 in additional revenue. I'd rather just do the basic report for the initial fee and not have to do a resubmission. So just try and get all the documentation up front and let us know when you do have it. And take the answer, take note. Do not take no as an answer when you ask for information. Tell them you want that information, period. There's very little in the state of Oregon. There is very little information that is protected and can therefore the association can say, well, that's confidential information. We don't have to provide that, or we don't have to share that to a buyer. Very, very little. And all of the information that we recommend that a buyer obtain in the course of one of these examinations, there's not a single document in that list that can be protected under Oregon law. So you can't, the seller and the HOA manager, anybody else can't say, well, we don't provide that information to a buyer. That's not a viable excuse. So stand your ground.
Information, Carson. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I just want to get one final word in. You guys, we wouldn't purchase a house without our clients doing a preliminary title report. And just what I'm hearing right here, don't let your clients purchase a house without doing a thorough examination of these HOA documents. Like, our guy here has created a software program to find out things because there's so much information to parse. So, like, do yourself a favor, hire a professional, protect your clients.
Can we get a document that we could give to our clients, especially with the HOAs, that says this is what they need to do as due diligence. It takes it off ours, because I'll read through all that stuff. I don't know they will.
The addendum actually provides you some shelter, but I don't know how, but I'm not sure how much real protection it does give you.
Yeah.
I mean, because if their expectation is something different and you've acted in a different way, then it kind of goes out the window. So I think the best thing to do would be to like heavily suggest they hire a professional to review the documents and do that in an email so you have proof of it happening. So if anything does happen, you say, look, I told you to hire, I begged you to hire a professional to do this.
So
So
document it, put it in an email.
You
yeah,
could say we always, I always
Yeah.
recommend.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I'm sure that helped Connie when she had it documented.
Yeah, she had all documented, yeah.
And I will tell you, having been in this business through many, many booms and busts, we're at the point in the cycle where the prices are so high, people are turning to condominiums because they're less expensive. We're also at the point in the cycle where inflation is really, really kicking in. We know that if we're trying to get bids on roofing and gutters and, try to get window people to come out and actually look at windows and things. It's tough out there in the contractor's world. And so the surprises are going to happen more and more as we go forward, just because this is where we're at in the cycle. And so you have to be even more diligent than ever, starting probably 18 months ago. And so don't take these lightly, and you have to trust but verify. Everything needs to be verified, as Carson said.
Great job.
I couldn't say it any better. It is what it is, and it's just, we have a lot of clients all over the world that hire our services, and people from literally all over the world. And a lot of these people are highly educated professionals. A lot of attorneys have purchased our reports. And I've asked them, said, you're an attorney, why don't you do it yourself? And they said, well, number one, we want your perspective because, we don't know, number one, local conditions. Number two, we don't really know, may know a lot about the law, for example, but don't necessarily know a lot about what's going on with homeowners associations in particular. And there's a value in that, believe me. It's a Wild West construct out there in terms of homeowners associations. Fortunately, on the West Coast, even though the laws in Oregon are not where I would like to see them, but the West Coast and the Western United States in general has far more robust statutory environment in this regard than you would find in other parts of the country. But it's still, even though there's laws that say you got to do a reserve study or you have to have an accountant audit the financial statement or review the financial statement, all these laws there's no enforcement language in any of these statutes. So even though the state law in Oregon says you must conduct a reserve study and you have to update it every year, if you don't do that, nothing happens. They're not going to get a letter from the state that says, we heard that you didn't update your reserve study. Well, so what? That's the bottom line. It's just all, it's just voluntary compliance is all it is. So you still, as a buyer, and certainly as an agent, you want to separate yourself from that conversation. You don't want to be in the middle of that conversation between a seller and a buyer about, well, am I supposed to expect a reserve study or not? So as an agent, you're just saying, hey, that's not my wheelhouse, talk to this guy, he knows. And that's just how it has to be done. If it's going to be, self-regulating, then we're going to help do the self-regulating. That's exactly why we started this business. My partners when we started a reserve study business almost 20 years ago, I had two partners, and they had come from the management industry. And they understood that the reserve study business needed some serious uplift. It needed a bar to be raised dramatically. We got into the reserve study business. And one of my two partners, the other partner is now retired and been bought out, but my other partner has her brief experience as a community manager almost 20 years ago. She quickly identified and recognized that something needed to be done to the benefit of buyers in this transaction process, because they need an advocate out there. And homeowners associations, if they're going to insist on being self-regulated, then they're going to need people like us in the marketplace to help regulate them. because somebody's got to compel them to do what they need to do. And that's, you know, we like to think we're having an impact. We can see with some of the bigger management companies, and we've been doing this now for over 10 years, you know, and everybody in town knows we're doing it, even the management companies that, I mean, they may not like it because we have created a scenario where they now have to do a little bit more work. But bottom line is that they're all starting, at least the bigger ones that are paying attention, you know, they're starting to kind of up their game a little bit because they know there's just going to be more buyers coming through the door. They're going to say, hey, I want that HOA document package. And I'm not going to go away until I get it. And your seller, i.e. your client, is not going to, you know, be able to sell their unit to me, at least, until I get this documentation. So some of the smaller management companies just don't have the resources to be able to respond to the way they should. But the larger, bigger management companies in Portland now, they realize that they've got to get this documentation together, and they're a little bit more responsive. I wouldn't say it's, you know, where it should be or where you would like it to be at a perfect world level, but it's a lot better than it was 10 years ago. I can tell you that. We were literally browbeating people to get these documents for the first 4 or 5 years that we started doing this. It was crazy. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Carson. We really appreciate all your information and your insight on this. And we will post your contact information in our Facebook group.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And anybody wants to give us a call if you have any questions about it, my assistant will probably be the one you talk to, but we're here to help. I mean, we really want this to work. And, you know, our mission is to bring positive change to the marketplace through this activity that we're doing. And I think we're having an impact on that. So
wonderful. All right.
good luck with it. Keep me posted. Okay. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.